Hello everybody, good evening, and welcome. My name is Lucy Bradnock, I'm the Dean for Research here at Foretold, and it's my huge pleasure to welcome all of you and also to welcome our guest speaker this evening, Nadia Radwan. Nadia is Senior Lecturer at the University of Bern, where she was previously Assistant Professor in World Art History. She's been a researcher and a teacher at the American University in Cairo, the American University of Dubai, the University of Zurich, and the University of Neuchâtel. Her research, which we're going to hear about this evening, focuses on transnational and global histories of the avant-garde, Middle Eastern modern and contemporary art, Orientalism, and decolonisation in the museum, and I should also add in art history more broadly. Her books include Les Modernes d'Égypte, published in 2017 by Peter Lang, and Painting and Sculpting the Nation, published in Arabic by the Cairo National Centre for Translation and Research in the Social Sciences in 2019. And she's currently working on the publication of her second book, and I think that's the material, some of which you're going to share with us this evening, which will be called Concealed Visibilities, Sensing the Aesthetics of Resilience in Global Modernism. She's collaborated on exhibition catalogues for the Kunsthaus Zurich, Metropolitan Museum of Art, the Sharjah Art Museum, and the Sainsbury Art Centre for Visual Arts at UEA. She is co-founder of the Swiss Platform for the Study of Visual Arts, Architecture and Heritage in the Middle East, and editor-in-chief of the Manazir Journal, for which she edited the 2019 special issue, The Arab Apocalypse, Art, Abstraction and Activism in the Middle East. She is also a member of the International Advisory Board of the journal Art History. And amongst all of those many activities and responsibilities, she has very generously found time to share her research with us today, for which we are profoundly grateful. So I will just hand over to Nadia. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Lucy, for this generous introduction. I'm very happy to be here, and I'm very grateful also for this invitation. I'm grateful also to be able to present a part of my more recent research, which is a part, as Lucy said, of my forthcoming book. I'd like to thank also the organizers of the research forum here at Porto. So today I shall present a part of my research on abstract artists from the Middle East. And because it's still an ongoing research, I'm looking forward to your feedback, comments, and questions at the end of my talk. The artists I shall be discussing today have in common that they engage with Western modernism while finding inspiration in the geometric principles of Islamic arts by integrating, for instance, elements of architecture, decorative ornament, poetry, calligraphy, Sufism, or theology. They belong to a generation that was born during the Mandate era and were therefore marked by political and social upheaval, conflict, sometimes war, and decolonial movements. All of them migrated at some point to Europe or to the United States. And there they were involved with the post-war art scene between the 50s and 70s. As members of the diaspora, looking back at their cultural heritage from a distance, they explored traditional elements in light of contemporary experiments. And I have had the chance to meet many of them and to conduct interviews also for this research, but sadly, some important figures have passed away during the past 5 years, including Kamal Boulata, whom I will be speaking of, and Etel Adnan. So I would like to discuss the way their works suggest alternative perspectives to the universalist claim of Western modernism by affirming the manifold and interrelated histories of abstraction and by transgressing its ideological implications. So from that perspective, I shall address the following questions. How can abstract art reveal forms of emancipation? How can the disputed heritages of Orientalism and ornament inform us about modern and contemporary art production? And finally, how can Middle Eastern artists expand the traditional narrative of abstraction? So, reflecting on these issues, my talk will be divided into 3 parts. First, I would like to discuss the prejudice of mimicry. That is to say, the idea that artists from the so-called global margins would be simply imitators of Western aesthetics, to instead point out that sameness may be a means for emancipation. Second, I will address the ways Western theories of ornament are being renegotiated through abstract art, and in particular, through the concept of the arabesque. And finally, I would like to bring to the fore the relationship between abstract geometry, the Arabic letter, calligraphy, and language in those works. Artists such as the American Lebanese painter and poet Adel Adnan, amongst others, have been recognized on the international level relatively late in their careers. And this is possibly, I would argue, because of a double exclusion. First, as artists of the diaspora, they did not necessarily fit in or find a legitimate place in the historiography of Western abstract art. And to this, one may add that many of the leading abstract artists from the Middle East happen to be women. And for the anecdote, when I asked Adel Adnan, of whom you see a painting, a late painting here, in a conversation held in Switzerland at the Paul Klee Center, if it had been difficult for her to be an Arab artist in the United States during the 60s and 70s, she answered that it was surely much more challenging to be a woman in the male-dominated milieu of abstract expressionism and conceptual art than an Arab artist at the time. The second exclusion is that by engaging with the Western pictorial tradition of abstraction without resorting to markers of authenticity, the works of those artists did not reflect their Arabness and were therefore also excluded from the nationalist narratives of Arab modern art. In that regard, art historian Nadine Atalla, in her study about Egyptian modern art, has highlighted the fact that the Western myth of greatness, as coined notably by Linda Nochlin, was not as relevant to this context than the notion of authenticity, called asala in Arabic. So asala, this concept, authenticity, was the concept used by 20th century Egyptian and also Arab art critics to qualify the works of modern artists. And to give you an example, figurative works such as this painting by the Egyptian artist Ragheb Ayad that integrate, as you can see, the tropes not only of peasantry but also of ancient Egypt, would have been the type of works that complied with this criteria of authenticity. And this was not the case of the artists I am interested in. Although artists such as the Lebanese painter and sculptor Salwa Hawda Choucair were in close contact with contemporary art movements in Europe, and in her case it was the Atelier d'Art Abstrait in Paris, it appears that they are hardly ever considered a part of this movement in art historical narratives. And this is an artwork, I'm showing it to you because it is currently on show at the Tate here. as part of the display called Infinite Geometry. And it's a display, it has several other artists included in it, but it echoes many points I will be discussing today. So, reflecting on this double exclusion, one could really ask oneself the following question. Why then would these artists persist in making art? What does it mean to be an Arab abstract artist in Paris in the 50s or in New York in the 60s and 70s? I suggest that engaging with abstraction not only represented a form of freedom connected to the diasporic condition, but also that sameness, that engaging with the Western aesthetic may have also functioned as a shield against self-essentializing. What I want to show here is that although these abstract works may seem very familiar to the Western viewer, to us at first glance, they offer counter-narratives to established canons and Greenbergian theories of abstraction. In particular, they challenge the dogma of the absence of subject matter, the self-referentiality of the medium, or the eradication of ornament. And this can be illustrated, for instance, by this series of silkscreen prints by the Palestinian artist and theorist Kamal Boulata, inspired by the architecture of the Alhambra in Granada, and in particular, the vaulted elements called muqarnas. Ethnomusicologist Kofi Agawu has argued that, I quote, contesting difference through an embrace of sameness might also prompt a fresh critique of essentialism. So building on this idea, one may suggest that an artist's engagement with a pictorial tradition that can be identified as Western and could subsequently be perceived as mimicry may in fact imply a conscious claim for emancipation. This could also pertain to the artist Menhat Hilmi, and who was on the announcement of this lecture, who was a pioneer of abstract painting and also printmaking in Egypt. She was trained in Cairo at the High Institute of Pedagogic Studies for Art, and she received a governmental scholarship in 1953 to pursue her education at the Slade School of Fine Arts here in London. And there it's at the Slade that she was exposed to printmaking, a medium she would later develop in Egypt throughout her career, and that was very little known at the time in Egypt. As one of the rare abstract artists of her generation, according to her grandson and biographer Karim Zidane, her work was recognized, but it was also criticized at the same time in Egypt for lacking clarity and for not being nationalistic enough, to the point of being called, I quote, a Western imitator. Nevertheless, many of Menhat Helmi's works relate to very specific political events in the context of war and conflicts in the Middle East. It's not the case of that one in particular, but others. And therefore, her approach challenges the implicitly monocultural and formalist narrative of abstraction. This may further be illustrated by the work of Samia Halabi. As most of the artists I'm focusing on, she did not rely on the spectacularity of politicized aesthetics, but her work involves the more subtle, yet powerful, critical potential of elements such as Islamic art and architecture and the ornament. In her practice, Halabi refers to multiple coexisting sources, such as the geometric ornaments of Islamic monuments, but also Russian constructivism and abstract expressionism. She was born in Jerusalem in 1936 and was 14 years old when her family migrated to the United States and settled in Cincinnati. She graduated from Indiana University at a time where abstract expressionism and minimalism were dominating the American art scene. And she was drawn to artists such as Mark Rothko, Jackson Pollock, Georgia O'Keeffe, Stuart Davis, as much as she was interested in the revolutionary ideas of Malevich, Lyubov-Popova, and Olga Rozanova, and the Mexican muralists as well. It was also in the Midwest that she started closely studying the heritage of Islamic art and architecture, in particular the intricate geometrical motifs of decorative elements, what she calls, and I quote her, Arabic abstraction. Thanks to a grant from the Kansas City Art Institute in 1966, she was able to travel to the Middle East and study the major monuments of Islamic art. In Jerusalem, she was particularly struck by the decorative elements and marble panels of the Dome of the Rock. For instance, her work entitled Third Spiral with Dark Center, which you see here, painted in 1970, embodies a disclosed relationship to the ornament. This painting, which reflects Halabi's rigorous attention to geometric abstract element and color, is based on the modular form of the square, in which luminous and metallic architectural volumes converge towards the black center of a spiral. As stated by the artist, and this is one of her slides, I mean, this is her comparison, not mine. This work is informed by Malevich, while it refers at the same time to the decorative marquetry of the Dome of the Rock. So, this spiral imparts an ornamental quality that is symbolically charged with meaning, and that refers to one of the most important Islamic monuments. The geometric modular repetitions around the square were also central to Kamal Boulata's theoretic and aesthetic research. Also born in Jerusalem, he was first trained in the Byzantine tradition of icon painting before graduating from the Academy of Fine Arts in Rome and later the Corcoran School of Art in Washington, D.C. As he was in the United States, he started working on a project inspired by the Dome of the Rock, in which he explores the square, which you see here, in which he explores the square as a paradigm in a series he would name Surat al-Ard, the navel of the earth. The ornament is thus far from being understood as merely decorative or superficial, but on the contrary, it is a process with agency and meaning. Speaking about the notion of the decorative in Islamic art, Samia Halabi stated, I quote, "I don't think there has ever been a decoration in Arab art. I never saw it as decorative. I always saw it as significant and meaningful. In Western painting, there is a huge difference between what is inside the painting and outside of it. In Arab art, the bounding form is organically linked to what is inside and outside the artwork," end quote. Therefore, these works claim the expansion of the definition of the ornament as a dynamic and vital structure that can generate meaning. And this brings me to my second point about the ways traditional Western discourses of ornament have been renegotiated by these artists, and in particular, the arabesque. As you all know, the links between the ornament, abstraction, and Islamic art have been theorized since the second half of the 19th century in the West in the field of decorative and applied arts. With their industrialization, the ornament would become a central subject of inquiry and encyclopedic classification, such as in Owen Jones' monumental Grammar of Ornament. Islamic art and architecture would occupy a central place in Jones' theories, and his designs for the Egyptian and Alhambra courts for the 1951 Great Exhibition, and later the so-called Oriental courts of the South Kensington Museum, would consecrate the interrelation between geometric ornament, abstraction, Islamic architecture, and polychromy. It is noteworthy also that out of the 20 chapters of the Grammar of Ornament, half of them are dedicated to the Arab and Islamic worlds, amongst which the plates titled Arabian, as you can see here, Assyrian, Egyptian, Moresque, Persian, and Turkish ornament. These plates, as remarked by art historian Ariane Varela-Braga, I quote, operate a kind of visual historical flattening. And indeed, the plates follow, in a sense, the Orientalist tradition of decontextualization and the collage of different elements taken from different times and geographies. Probably the most popular elements in theories of ornament, the arabesque, was to be theorized by Jones and his contemporaries, including the Austrian art historian Alois Riegel. The dissection and flattening of the arabesque would make it easily reproducible as a decorative addition to orientalize art objects or architectural buildings. Thus, in the second half of the 19th century, Orient and ornament would almost become synonymous, and Islamic art would be reduced essentially to its abstract qualities. As Finbar Barry-Flood suggests, the Islamic ornament, and in particular the arabesque, was ultimately to become a prerogative of cultural production and to a certain extent of racial prejudice. Here is an example of a painting by the Egyptian artist Ramses Yunan. Yunan is mostly renowned as one of the leading figures of the Egyptian surrealist group called Art and Liberty, which was founded in 1939, but he turned towards abstraction in his late career. In the painting that you see here, titled Arabesque, Yunan's expressionist take on the anthropomorphic interlacing elements creates an overall impression of vital force. This may indicate the intention to redeem the ornament from its flatness and consequently from its theorization by activating its openness, its movement, and its agency. Art historian Anneke Lensen has similarly remarked that the arabesque in the works of another important Syrian painter, Adam Ismail, could imply, I quote, a non-rational, timeless vitality that enabled the artist to renegotiate art historical genealogies and constructions of Arabness, end quote. This aspect is also addressed by Kamal Boulata about the arabesque. He suggests that rather than a typical Islamic ornament embellishing art objects, the arabesque should be understood as a visual language whose fundamental vocabulary derives its system from Arabic grammar and its word formation. And from that perspective, the variegations of the arabesque, far from being simply a superficial addition to a surface, point to the formation of structures linked to the Arabic word. For instance, the Iraqi artist Mehdi Mutashar whom you see an installation here, and who spent most of his life working in Paris, considers the arabesque as a fundamental element of abstract geometry that has no fixed or finished character. It is, so the arabesque, according to him, the negation of the void that indicates the infinite. And in this installation, representing the word la, which means no, but which is also a letter, and I put the letter for those who cannot read Arabic, a letter called the lam alif. So it is the negation, the word no, and the lam alif, which Mutashar is reducing to really the essence of its abstract qualities. And you see also the four superposed diamond-shaped elements are in indigo blue. And this is one of the almost only colors used by the artist, but yet very essential in his work. I met him a couple of days ago, so I can tell you what he told me. But for him, this blue, this specific indigo blue, recalls, first of all, the Mesopotamian glazed tiles, but also the blue decorative tiles of the mosques and mausoleums of Karbala in Iraq. And he grew up in this environment of Mesopotamian heritage, but also the Islamic mosques, the Islamic Iraqi mosques. And he also told me about calligraphy, because there is a lot of playfulness in his work, that when he was visiting with his mother those mosques and he could not read, he was a young child, it was a game for him to follow the calligraphy and draw with his hands. So there is really this idea, and one finds this with many other artists, that writing is in fact painting, it's in fact drawing. And this brings me to my third and last point about the integration of the letter form in abstract art. And the title in the beginning was the word, actually refers to the title of this silk screen by Kamal Bulata, a title that points to the significance of the written word in Islamic theology as the commencement, the beginning of the sacred revelation. What I have to explain also is that many of the artists I'm speaking of today have been grouped under a term called hurufeya. It's a term that designates, one doesn't really know if it designates a movement or a genre, but it's commonly used to designate abstract artists from the Middle East who engaged with calligraphy as of the 50s. This is when really abstraction started to manifest itself more or less at the same time in different regions or countries of the Middle East. So hurufeya is derived from the word harf, which means literally the written sign, the letter. However, most of the artists that I mentioned today do not consider themselves as what we call hurufi artists, but rather as abstract geometric artists, although they have often been labeled as such, and especially on the market, because it's, well, I'm not going to go into the details of the global art market, but to label the artists as hurufi artists is also, of course, a good way to generate, let's say, to put them on the market. Basically, yeah, ethnic branding in a sense. Anyways, So another example of the integration of calligraphy is by the Iraqi-Syrian artist Mediha Omar. And she was one of the first to publish a text on the subject in 1949 entitled Arabic Calligraphy, an Inspiring Element in Abstract Art. She was amongst the first Iraqi women artists to receive a governmental scholarship to study abroad. And she actually came here and graduated in arts and crafts from the Maria Gray Training College in 1933. Then she went back to Baghdad, lived there for a while before she moved to Washington, D.C., where she studied, like Kamal Bulata, at the Corcoran Academy of Fine Arts. And it was also, like the others, in the United States that she started studying Islamic art and took an interest in the works of big scholars of Islamic art who were there at the time, Nabia Abbott and also Richard Ettinghausen. In her texts, which is almost a manifesto, she makes a clear differentiation between the reception of Arabic calligraphy as decorative design and its abstract and symbolic qualities. She states, I quote, "The meaning of Arabic calligraphy need not to be limited anymore to the space filling of geometrical design. Each letter is able and has a personality dynamic enough to form an abstract design." So the emancipation of the letter form from its ornamental constraints can be illustrated by Omar's work, and in particularly this one entitled The Eyes of the Night, painted in 1961. She painted it in earthy colors with shades of gray, brown, and beige, and the letter Ain, which only exists in Arabic and which I also wrote, is at the center of this work. And Ain is a letter, but it also means the eye and the source, or the water spring, which is a very important element also in the Quran. And it's repeated several times as if spiraling in a dynamic circular movement towards its progressive disintegration. So the gradual disappearance of the legible letter gives way to circular shapes in darker red, black, and gray shades that evoke a multitude of eyes as if emerging in the night, as referred to in the title of the painting. Also, the eye is an important symbol because it refers in the region to the evil eye, which is also a superstitious belief. So here you see that the letter, and we saw it also in the previous artwork, is not just a letter, it's not just the mere integration of calligraphy, but it is really elevating the letter, multiplying the letter to circumscribe its meaning. And a decade after Mediha Omar produced this work, she joined a group of other Iraqi fellow artists called the One Dimension Group, that included also its leading figure, the artist, critic, and influential theorist, Shakir Hassan al-Said, and you see here one of his works. He was very much informed by Sufism, and he published a manifesto in 1971 called the One Dimension Manifesto, which is based on several principles of Sufism, including the role of the artist in revealing hidden meaning batin, through apparent meaning, zahir. Al-Said advocates the collapse of two worlds, that of the linguistic and the visual, in favor of a single inner dimension, and this is the one dimension. And in this work, titled The Victorious, also in Arabic, Al-Muntasirun, one single letter features at the center of the canvas, the letter Waw, which is the letter, wow, but also means and. So it's a conjunction that connects, that adds, so that signifies wholeness. And the wow appears like a graffito on a concrete textured wall. And the painting also recalls the work of Catalan artist Antoni Tàpies, whom we know was a very important reference for Al-Said. We can see other words and scribbled signs that are hardly perceptible, as if they have been whitewashed or progressively erased over time. So the gradual disappearing of the letters on the painted surface also emphasizes the relationship to the invisible and the undecipherable. The negation of void through the presence of the illegible is also an important aspect in the works of Lebanese artist Salwa Haouda Choucair, and this work is also at the Tate. Fascinated by natural sciences, mathematics, quantum physics, biology, but also Islamic theology, Choucair applied both scientific and spiritual principles to her paintings and sculptures. She was born in Beirut, where she graduated in national sciences and was also trained by a very important Lebanese modernist painter, Omar Onsi, before she traveled to Paris in 1948 to study at the École des Beaux-Arts and also frequented the studio of Fernand Léger. However, she rapidly broke away from his Cubist aesthetics to join a group of artists with whom she shared much more affinities. Together with Jean Dewan, Edgar Pierre, and Victor Vasarely, Choucair organized the activities of the Atelier d'Art Abstrait, which led her to become one of the first Arab artists, if not the first, I'm not sure, to exhibit at the Salon des Réalités Nouvelles in 1951. In the 60s, she created a series of sculptures she called sculptural poems, and this is part of this series. Poem is a vertical wooden structure made of imbricated organic modular forms that recall Arabic letter forms, the arabesque, or also the rhythm of the verses of a poem that each have their own meaning while remaining a part of a whole. Choucair's sculptures seem to activate the openness of forms in space as they can be recombined and repeated infinitely. I don't know how I am with time. I think I'm fine, right? The Lebanese painter, calligrapher, poet, and art critic Samir Sayed has said about Choucair's sculptures that they were not about shapes that function as containers, but about the absence of containment, about shapes that allow and facilitate movement for the purpose of realizing the elevation and transcendence of Sufism. But he may have also very well been speaking of his own work, inspired by Arabic letters and calligraphy. And you have here an example of his experimentation with the abstract qualities and minimal structures of the letter Tha. So you can see this letter here, and you see how he almost created an abstract landscape, but still keeping the three diacritic letters to signify that it is the Tha. I would like to end my talk by briefly addressing the issue of language in a broader sense. One of the aspects of displacement is that it transforms the relationship to language. Learning a foreign language, not speaking one's mother tongue, feeling vulnerable, or on the contrary, having to speak multiple languages to be able to navigate between different cultural environments. This is a characteristic of the diasporic condition. And Etel Adnan is an emblematic example of a plurilingual generation who grew up in the Middle East in the 40s and 50s. Born in Lebanon, her mother was a Christian Greek from Smyrna and her father a Muslim Syrian. She grew up speaking Greek and Turkish in an Arabic-speaking society, and as many Lebanese of the upper class, French became her main intellectual language until she moved to California and started writing in English. Language is thus central in her work, not only as a writer and a poet, but also as a painter. And she often addressed the issue of writing in a foreign language and later of painting in Arabic. In the numerous leporellos she produced, so there are these large foldable accordion-like books. It's a format she used a lot and liked very much. She integrated, in turn, poetic texts in English, French, or Arabic, contemporary or classical, written by herself or by others. And if you look at her leporellos, maybe it was clearer here, they show that she does not master Arabic. It is actually the writing of a child. And yet it is precisely this playfulness and the pleasure of writing in a language, or copying almost a language that is familiar, but that one doesn't really master. It is in this process that she found the freedom or forms of creative expression. She explains, I quote, "Something from my childhood emerged, the pleasure of writing, line after line, Arabic sentences which I understood very imperfectly. It was like seeing through a veil, looking at an extraordinary scenery through a screen," end quote. And this is another leporello dedicated to the poet Wendell Berry. And the narrative quality of the book is expressed through the interplay between the graphic style with elongated lines of certain letters and the gentle strokes of watercolor shapes. Interestingly, while the text is written in French, the rhythmic extended lines of certain letters recall the aesthetic of the traditional Arabic Kufic script, which you can see on this board. So by dedicating a leporello in French to an American poet with a style of writing that recalls classical Arabic calligraphy, this work decompartmentalizes, in a sense, the cultural indexes of language. And I am now coming, I think, to my conclusion. So I have shown that these artists engaged with Western pictorial traditions of abstraction while referring to elements of belonging, such as Islamic art and architecture, and the concept of the ornament. While these components are not always immediately visible from a formal point of view, they are nevertheless discreetly present, and they convey significant counter-narratives to discourses of modernism, as well as resistance to dominating canons of abstraction. So the aim of my talk was to bring to the fore forms of emancipation and counter-narratives to Orientalist and colonial heritages that are conveyed by works that do not recourse to political aesthetics or the spectacularity of activist art. They nevertheless show us that elements such as the ornament are not innocent, but can in fact be political. Thank you for your attention.